Good morning. My name is Eric Hessel. I'm an attorney, former New Orleans police officer for 17 years, and I've been representing the Police Association in New Orleans. I'm here on behalf of Trooper August McKay. Recently, it's agenda item 4. He's mentioned by name in there, and then apparently there's going to be a discussion in regards to an alleged racial slur that he used. And it disturbs me greatly that this is being reported incorrectly by numerous sources, and I can only believe that the sources are coming from within the LSP, or as repeated in the media at least, that this slur was directed at a trooper, towards a trooper, something along those lines. Simply wasn't the case. It wasn't even made in the presence of a trooper. It wasn't even made in the presence of the public. Any investigation, and I know the investigation would reveal that, but those facts aren't coming out. And I'm here because apparently nobody else is going to bring the facts out. It's incumbent upon the LSP or the legal department or somebody to set the record straight. There's nothing more important to a police officer than his reputation and his integrity. And in times like these, it's even more important. And for that type of misinformation to get out, basically his career is not, I think hindered would be too weak of a word, but brought embarrassment to his family, threats to his family, threats to himself, jeopardized his life by reporting that he was currently working in an undercover capacity. And the information that he was moved from a federal task force because of it. That's news to him because he's still in that federal task force. So I'm asking that if this discussion is going to contain Gus McKay's allegations, that it's a factually correct conversation.
So let's put it in context and make sure we understand your position. It's not your position that the expletive and the slur were not used.
That's not my position, yes.
It's simply that it was not directed to another trooper and it wasn't said in public, and that he hasn't been removed from the federal task force. Is that fair?
Well, I think that's fair. That's factually accurate, okay. But the damage has been done, and I just think the facts were clear to the state police back then because they issued him a letter of counseling, and which is not appealable. The letter that was released to the public is factually inaccurate, and he certainly would have appealed that should that have been delivered to him. So basically, he was denied due process to fight the allegations that are now being made by the state police and the general public.
We put it on our agenda. It was published as every other agenda. You heard about it. You're here to present it. Anybody who wanted to make comment is welcome to make comment. So we've heard your comment.
Thanks, sir.
Right now we want to talk about facts that might provide us with an opportunity to address our obligations to both the state police and to the public.
And I don't know that particular facts of particular cases are before this commission today.
Well, they are.
Or that they should be.
Well, they are before this commission. And we might disagree over whether they should be or not. So I have some questions for you. Does the state police agree with the words of our governor that it's appalling, regardless of to whom they were addressed, and whether it was in the presence of the public, for a state trooper to use an expletive, which I will never repeat, and a racial slur, which I will never repeat? Is it appalling and disgusting that such language would be used by a state trooper?
Mr. Simeon, Chairman Simeon, I'm not going to comment on the governor's comment. It's not my place to do so. What I will say is that an EEO investigation was conducted. It was presented through a chain of command. It was reported quickly and responded to quickly. It was handled in a confidential manner, which is required by our policy, and is also required by the EEOC when handling such complaints. And the purpose of that confidentiality is so that people will, in fact, complain, so that we can address behavior. And that actually occurred here. There was an investigation. The investigation revealed what took place. We did attempt to protect the names of the parties because that's important to the EEO process. If we have people knowing about these complaints and potentially retaliating against people for making the complaints, then our system doesn't work. And the goal is to know about behavior, have behavior be reported, and have behavior be corrected. And that is actually what happened in this case, sir. So I don't think it's appropriate for us to comment. We counseled the trooper, and all parties were satisfied with the result. The complaining party was satisfied, and there have been no complaints about that trooper since that time. And that indicates to me that the problem was fixed.
You do agree with me that there is a training issue when a trooper believes that he can use such language directed at someone?
That is certainly part of training of how to treat people, yes, sir.
Would it violate the confidentiality for someone to have a confidential discussion with this commission relative to that sort of investigation?
To be honest with you, I hadn't looked at that aspect of it, sir, but it's just, it's not proper, and it hurts the whole process. And I realize we got this one thing that happened, and it went wrong, okay? From an administrative mistake, it went wrong. But generally speaking, our process works, and we're able to give confidentiality to the people who come in to us and complain, and we're able to try to fix problems. And I realize we don't fix racism. I realize that. But we try to fix it in the workplace. That's all we can do is try to fix it in the workplace. And when it comes to us, that's the process that we have, and confidentiality of the information in it is paramount to it working. Unfortunately, in this situation, confidentiality was not maintained.
Well, I would suggest that maybe we work together to try to figure out whether or not that would be a violation of the rules of confidentiality, to have a confidential discussion with the director of our commission to see whether or not this is not the sort of thing that we can work together to try to solve as opposed to individually. So I understand something slipped through the cracks. The letter of disciplinary letter was not delivered. Has there been any, and maybe you won't be in a position to answer this question, but there's a commander that let that happen, isn't that correct? I don't think that's confidential information.
Well, and I don't have the full facts on ultimately how it slipped through the cracks, but my understanding is that yes, it was sent to a commander and that it was not delivered and it was not followed up on.
So one of the things I would be concerned about is adoption of some rules and processes to ensure that that sort of thing does not happen again.
And that has occurred already. That has occurred both in my office and in internal affairs. So the process was different in this circumstance because the letter, the investigation was conducted not by IA, but by our EEO compliance investigators. So IA charts their cases, and they also chart their deliveries of letters and when they're supposed to be returned. This letter came out of my office, out of the compliance review section's investigators, and it didn't get onto that list to follow up on. That has been corrected in IA as well as in my office.
Chairman, may I ask a question? In regards to charting, are you talking about charting with a program or a system that tracks the delivery or the time limits or a case management system? Or are you talking about tracking on a whiteboard?
I think it's better than a whiteboard, but less than a case management. As you know, we are working on case management across the department at this time. I can't speak to internal affairs, their program. I apologize for that. My office isn't that sophisticated. We've got it marked at, hey, check it out in 2 weeks, make sure you follow up on it. Calendar it, so it's
so-
not any more formal than that.
I'm sorry, thank you. So in regards to the safeguards that are now put in place to make sure that the department is following the rules as far as delivering a punishment, for example, that wasn't done in this particular case we're talking about, what has been changed, and is there less of a, let's say, interest, but to prevent that, to not transfer the responsibility to someone else, rather than the investigators themselves who are doing the investigation, could potentially make sure that's delivered if they did it themselves. My understanding in all investigations, it's sent to the captain or then maybe a shift lieutenant or an XO, or someone has that responsibility to meet those deadlines, rather than the person who is conducting the investigation.
Well,
What's changed?
nothing has changed in that regard. The captain, the chain of command of the person involved is the best person, generally speaking, to deliver it to him. We are a statewide agency. There are very strict time limits, as you know. So I mean, there are restraints in the investigators personally going all over the state and delivering letters. This is the only time in my recollection that there's been a failure of this sort. It was, in my understanding, an administrative oversight. You know, the captains are very efficient at getting the job done. This was an anomaly.
Why wasn't the letter just delivered anyway, and accepting that there was a human error, an oversight, an administrative error, and deliver the punishment anyway?
I made that recommendation based on the fact that when we discovered it, and it was my office that discovered it, and Internal Affairs, when we were doing a Giglio response on the trooper involved. And my attorney turned up, there's nothing on this guy, it's a clean Giglio. And I said, absolutely not, I discipline this guy. I know
If
he's
you
got
don't
a
mind
lot.
for the rest of the people in the audience, why don't you explain what a Giglio is?
A Giglio request is a request by the prosecuting agency where a trooper or a law enforcement officer is going to be testifying. They want us to report, and we have an obligation to report any negative information, any impeachment type information that might be on that person testifying. We get them on troopers, we get them on our analysts for the crime lab, but we have to say if there's something that deals with their honesty or the way that they do their job, or if there are any biases. So I knew there was something there, and as such, we looked into what happened. Why is that not in the file? Well, it wasn't in the file because it hadn't been delivered. So it was December of 2019, so 2 years after the incident, and close to 2 years from the time that the letter was issued. And in my recommendation, that was violative of the rules because it was late, because we're supposed to deliver those letters within a certain period of time. And I made the recommendation that it be turned to a counseling so that it would be on the record, it would still be memorialized, and it was still Giglio material. So we also looked into whether there was any complaints about the trooper in the interim, since he had not received the letter, and there had not been. But what he had received, he knew he had been investigated, he acknowledged the incident, and he also received the decision page that he was going to be disciplined. So he knew action was being taken, and there was no indication that there had been any other problems with the trooper. So the recommendation was, instead of issuing something that could be appealed legitimately under the rules because it was late, I made the recommendation that it be turned to a counseling and that it be final.
Thank you.
Now, This commission has taken the position in the past. I can't speak to what position we would take in the future, but that even delayed punishment can still be affirmed by this commission.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir. Commissioner Crawford.
Was the decision to provide a letter of counseling based on the weight of the offense, or was it based on the weight of not being made public with a potential appeal to this board? Was there any consideration, let me rephrase it, was there any consideration from your office, based on what you said in your opening comments, about the keeping this information as confidential as possible to enable future incidents and those who would come forward with claims of racism or disparate treatment protection? And did you feel that it was better under those guidelines to keep this at a counseling level because of that ideology, or was there discussion in your office about let's keep this as quiet as possible for whatever reason? I'll let you explain that, because we don't want this to go public because it could potentially be damaging to the troopers and the state and all those involved.
In my mind, and honestly, I mean, the decision was made fairly quickly. My recommendation was made very quickly. We had been considering previously the confidentiality of the matter.
Sure.
But at that moment, finality was what was most important to me. In my mind,
because the 2 years had passed.
having it be concluded was the most important thing.
And what took so long? Why did it take 2 years to?
We didn't know it hadn't been delivered.
Okay.
So it wasn't until we received the Giglio request and we looked at his file and it wasn't there, that I knew it should have been there. And that's when I said, something went wrong, it should be there. So we
Okay.
corrected that.
If we go back to 17 when the incident happened though, and we believe that the discipline counseling was being administered, who made that decision that it would only be counseling? Was that a joint discussion between administration and legal at that time, that this was acting in accordance to other types of incidents of this magnitude, or was it something that just, I'm trying to figure out the frame of mind here, because I, like the governor and like our chairman, find the remarks disgusting, appalling, and for a member of public safety who has to protect all demographics of our state, who has shown a disregard and a prejudice toward a certain segment of our population that they are sworn to protect, gives me grave concern for his ability to be able to fairly administer the law in his capacity. Thus, this is my opinion, providing a letter of counseling is grossly inadequate for what transpired here. So what I'm trying to determine is who made that decision on counseling would, because, and I'm not talking about this particular individual, I'm talking about there are system problems and there are personnel problems. It sounds like there were both in this instance. There was a system problem that didn't catch it, there was a personnel problem and then it didn't get administered. You said you'd taken care of that, and I believe you, if that's what you're telling me. But I think going back to the 17 incident itself and the fact that someone could make a statement of that magnitude in 2017, and for the administrative body to get together and decide this is a counseling. I can't wrap my hands around that. I was in the fire service for 27 years, and I know what warrants a counseling. Somebody backs up a fire truck without a spotter, that's a counseling. If somebody disparages an entire race in such a derogatory and obscene way, that warrants more than a counseling. That's my opinion. And I would hope, if it happens again, that that would be taken into consideration.
Yes, sir. So, and I know it's probably apples to oranges to you at this point. The original decision was a letter of reprimand, which is in fact discipline. It wasn't a counseling, it was a letter of reprimand.
Still not enough.
And I understand that. I just wanted to clarify that for the record. The EEO process, the investigation takes place. The EEO compliance officers do
And let me ask you a
investigate.
question before you proceed. When you say EEO, are we talking about a federal EEOC complaint?
sir.
Or are we talking about an internal?
No, sir.
Can you
It's
tell me if there was a
internal.
federal complaint filed at the same time?
No, sir.
Or has there ever been one filed in this case?
Not in this case.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear, when you kept saying EEO, I think federal EEOC.
I'm sorry. I'm
Okay,
sorry.
that's fine.
So, after the report is prepared, it then goes to the colonel, and the colonel assigns a 3-person committee. And this is by our policy. The 3-person committee reviews and makes findings and makes recommendations. So it was the 3-person review panel of commissioned officers in this case who reviewed and made the recommendation of what that discipline was.
And is that binding for the I guess the colonel, the colonel's the final decision maker. You're an is this an advisory board, this 3-member panel, or is this a binding decision that they make that he is bound to, or does he just take it into consideration?
He's not bound to it.
Okay, so he ultimately makes the call.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Any other commissioners on this particular topic? Yes, Commissioner
I'm
Brown.
confused. The initial decision was to discipline by letter.
Yes, sir.
That was in 2017.
Yes, sir.
And then in 2019, there was a realization that even that had not been done.
Correct.
Any others on this particular topic? And Ms. Morrison, I do want to commend you on something in regards to this, and that is the correct decision that you made when the Giglio request came in. I wish I could say that every lawyer sitting in your position at that time would have made that correct decision. I don't think they would have. Some of them would have said, I looked in the file and I don't see anything. And you have to be commended for taking that extra step, knowing that it probably was going to lead to probably sitting here right now today. But I want to commend you for being forthright and honest enough to have done that. I wish I could say that every lawyer would have done that.
Well, thank you for saying that. I don't think I should be commended for doing the right thing, but I appreciate it.
Well, we shouldn't live in a world where it's necessary to commend people for doing the right thing, but unfortunately, I think that's the world we live in, and so I do want to commend you
Well, I appreciate it.
for doing that, and thank you. Thank you for that. So,
The first instance that was discussed, dealing with the 2 years that the letter sat there, but didn't get into it. Just, it certainly seems appropriate at this time to find out why that rule was not followed. And investigate as to whether or not we need to change our rules to make sure that that compliance is there. And so, I would so move that we initiate an investigation as to whether we need changes in our rules to allow that kind of follow-up when we get information regarding that investigation.
well, I would second your motion, if you'll accept this friendly amendment as we also need to look into whether or not we should pass rules relative to the conduct at question in this case, and make it a rule violation for someone to use such language in the course of their employment.
I wouldn't accept that as a.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. So, Director, got your instructions.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir. Commissioner Crawford.
if I could, and just to clarify, I believe wholeheartedly that Trooper McKay's actions were isolated. I believe the Louisiana State Police and the overwhelming number of troopers that are out there risking their lives every day for the citizens of this state are commendable, honest, hardworking men and women. But it only takes one to put a stain on an organization that is hard to wash off. And thus, it is the responsibility of the administration to do that and to uphold the integrity of the organization and the institution which you represent. When you fail to do that, it fails the organization and it fails the entire state. And so I trust we've learned something from this experience. But I want to be clear. Those commendable troopers that are out there doing their job every day, them being judged on what somebody else said, because they are being judged, all of them, because of what one member's gross, obscene, incomprehensible actions, regardless of the setting, they are all judged by that individual now, unfortunately. And the administration added to that by mishandling the discipline. So I look for better. You told me there's going to be better. There's been administrative remedies that have been put in place, and I hope to see those. But there has been irreparable harm and damage done to the institution and to those troopers out there who don't share this ideology that will take time. And if something like this occurs again, I would expect a deeper dive into how to handle it more appropriately. Thank you,
Thank you. And I certainly agree with your comments, including those who recognize that the vast majority of our troopers are doing a tremendous job out there. Unfortunately, they can get tainted by the conduct of one, particularly when something like this happens and the one that did it, or at least allegedly did it, there's not full investigation and then follow through to ensure that proper discipline is put in place. But I do have a